The billionaire's baby wouldn't stop crying on the plane, until a prisoner's son did the unthinkable. "Shut that kid up now." The shout echoed through the first-class cabin of Flight 447 bound for Miami, making every passenger turn to stare at businessman Marcus Whitfield, 38, who was desperately holding his 8-month-old daughter Isabella as she screamed like her life depended on it. 4 straight hours since takeoff from New York, the baby's wails had turned this luxury flight into pure hell. Marcus had tried everything: bottles, diapers, expensive toys, even pressing noise-canceling headphones with classical music against little Isabella's ears. Nothing worked. Each attempt only made the screaming worse, piercing everyone's eardrums. Flight attendant Sarah approached him for the 5th time, her professional smile completely gone. "Mr. Whitfield, I need you to find a solution. The other passengers are extremely upset and some have already threatened to sue the airline." Marcus looked around and saw the murderous glares from the other first-class passengers. Socialite Victoria Ashford was typing furiously on her phone, probably writing scathing reviews on social media. Retired Judge Harold Mitchell was pounding his fist on the armrest with every new scream from Isabella. Even the Metropolitan Church pastor, Reverend Thompson, was muttering words that definitely weren't prayers. "Listen here, Whitfield," growled Executive James Morrison, standing up from his seat. "Some of us paid $15,000 for this ticket to have peace and quiet. If you can't control your daughter, you should have flown economy with the other commoners." Marcus felt his blood boil. He was CEO of Whitfield Industries, a tech company valued at $2.3 billion. He'd built his empire from scratch after growing up in a rough Detroit neighborhood. He wasn't used to taking disrespect from anyone. But there, holding Isabella who was crying inconsolably, he felt completely powerless. The truth was that Marcus had never taken care of Isabella alone for more than 2 hours. His ex-wife Catherine had always handled the child, until 3 weeks ago when she'd left for a spiritual retreat in Switzerland, abandoning both him and their daughter without explanation. The nannies he hired lasted 2 days max before quitting, claiming Isabella was impossible to handle. That's when something unexpected happened. From the economy section, a young man around 17 appeared in the aisle. His clothes were simple but clean, and he carried a patched-up backpack. His dark eyes had a strange calmness that contrasted with the chaos around him. "Excuse me, sir," said the young man, his calm voice cutting through Isabella's screams. "Can I try to help?" Marcus looked at the teenager with equal parts suspicion and desperation. "Who are you?" "My name is Diego Santos. I have experience with babies." The kid carefully extended his arms. Sometimes they just need a different approach. Normally, Marcus would never let a stranger touch his daughter, especially someone who clearly came from economy class. But after 4 hours of auditory torture and murderous looks from other passengers, he was willing to try anything. "Please," Marcus whispered, handing Isabella to the unknown young man. What happened next defied all logic. The moment Diego held Isabella, the screaming stopped instantly. Complete silence fell over the cabin, so sudden and total that some passengers looked out the windows thinking the plane had fallen from the sky. Diego held the baby in a way Marcus had never seen, applying gentle pressure to specific points on Isabella's back while murmuring something in Spanish. The little girl's eyes, swollen from crying so much, focused on the young man's face and she let out a small sigh of relief. "How the hell did you do that?" Marcus whispered, barely believing what he'd just witnessed. Diego smiled slightly, continuing the rhythmic movements on Isabella's back. "My little sister had severe colic. I learned some techniques, unconventional ones." Marcus watched, fascinated, as his daughter, who had been inconsolable for hours, began to completely relax in this stranger's arms. But there was something in Diego's gaze that intrigued him deeply. A premature maturity, a shadow of pain that shouldn't exist in someone so young's eyes. And Marcus had no idea that this chance encounter was about to reveal secrets that would change their lives forever. Secrets about Diego's past that would explain not only his mysterious ability with children, but also why a 17-year-old was traveling alone with documents that Marcus would soon discover were fake. If you're enjoying this story of overcoming and mystery, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to discover how this impossible encounter between two completely different worlds was about to reveal truths that neither was prepared to face. For the next 15 minutes, Isabella remained completely calm in Diego's arms, making only small contented sounds. The first-class passengers watched the scene with a mix of relief and disturbing curiosity. Marcus couldn't take his eyes off the young man who had accomplished the impossible. "Where did you learn this?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with fascination and suspicion. Diego hesitated for a moment, his fingers continuing the gentle movements on Isabella's back. "Like I said, my sister had trouble sleeping. My mother taught me some techniques before." "Before what?" Marcus pressed, noticing how Diego avoided his gaze. "Before she died," Diego replied quietly, a shadow of pain crossing his young face. Marcus felt a tightness in his chest. There was something about the way Diego spoke that triggered his business intuition. After years building companies and dealing with people, he developed a sixth sense for detecting when someone was withholding important information. That's when James Morrison, the executive who had yelled earlier, approached with an expression of barely disguised disdain. "Very impressive, kid," he said with venomous sarcasm. "But now that you've done your little trick, you can go back where you belong. First class isn't a place for people like you." Diego kept his composure, but Marcus noticed how his muscles tensed. "Of course, sir. I just wanted to help." "Wait," Marcus interrupted, cold anger rising in his chest. "People like him? What exactly do you mean by that, Morrison?" Morrison laughed with disdain. "Come on, Whitfield. Look at him. Cheap clothes, patched backpack, traveling alone in economy. He probably shouldn't even be on this flight. These types always have ulterior motives." The tension in the air became palpable. Diego started to hand Isabella back to Marcus, but the businessman gently held his arm. "Don't move." Isabella's been calm for the first time in hours. "You can't be serious," Morrison continued, his voice rising. "You're going to let a complete stranger, probably a juvenile delinquent, hold your daughter? Have you completely lost your mind?" "Watch your words," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a subtle threat that made executives tremble in boardrooms. But Morrison was far from finished. He pulled out his phone and started taking photos of Diego. "I'm going to research this kid. I bet we'll discover interesting things about his background." Diego visibly paled, almost letting Isabella slip from his arms. Marcus noticed the reaction immediately. "What's wrong?" Marcus whispered to Diego. "Nothing, sir. I just think it's better if I go back to my seat." But Morrison was already typing furiously on his phone, using business connections to run a real-time background check. "Interesting," he murmured after a few minutes, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Very interesting indeed." "What did you find out?" asked Victoria Ashford, the socialite who had joined the group with malicious curiosity. Morrison cleared his throat theatrically. "Diego Santos, 17 years old, from Phoenix, Arizona. Orphaned since age 14. And here's the fascinating part." He made a dramatic pause. "Son of Miguel Santos, currently serving a 15-year sentence for armed robbery and assault." The silence that followed was deafening. Diego closed his eyes as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Marcus felt the world spinning around him. "Prison daddy," Morrison continued with sadistic pleasure. "And from what I see here, the kid has an interesting history too. Several run-ins with juvenile police, drug problems, gang involvement." "Stop," Diego whispered, his voice barely audible. "Oh, but there's more," Morrison laughed. "Ran away from his last foster home 6 months ago. Technically, he's considered a missing minor. And the documents he used for this flight." Morrison waved his phone in the air. "Completely forged." Marcus looked at Diego and saw tears forming in the young man's eyes. Isabella, as if sensing the tension, began to get agitated again in his arms. "So," Morrison concluded triumphantly, "we have here a fugitive minor, son of a criminal, using fake documents, alone with the baby of one of America's richest men. What a touching story." Victoria Ashford sighed dramatically. "Marcus, darling, you need to call security immediately. Who knows what this delinquent was planning to do." Diego quickly handed Isabella back to Marcus and stepped back. I would never hurt a child. I just wanted to help." "Of course you did," Morrison sneered. "Probably planning a kidnapping. Or maybe a ransom demand. These types always have a scheme." Marcus looked at Diego and saw something that disturbed him deeply. Not guilt or fear of being caught. but a painful resignation, as if the young man was used to being judged for other sins and circumstances beyond his control. And in that moment, Marcus made a decision that would shock everyone aboard. A decision that would reveal not only who Diego Santos really was, but also what kind of man Marcus Whitfield would choose to be when confronted with prejudices he himself had faced years ago. Isabella started crying again, as if she could sense that her only source of comfort was being pushed away by forces she couldn't understand. Marcus Whitfield looked at Diego, then at Morrison, and finally at his desperately crying daughter. After 15 years building his business empire, he'd learned to make quick decisions based on instinct and evidence. And right now, all evidence pointed to a truth that Morrison and the others refused to see. "Morrison," Marcus said in a dangerously calm voice, "you just made the biggest mistake of your career." The executive laughed with disdain. "Oh please. You're going to defend this delinquent now." "This delinquent," Marcus replied, taking Isabella in his arms where she immediately intensified her crying, "accomplished in minutes what pediatric doctors, professional nannies, and I couldn't achieve in weeks. And you want me to believe someone with bad intentions would do that?" Diego remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if waiting for the verdict of his social execution. Marcus continued, his voice gaining intensity. "You know what I see when I look at this kid? I see someone who, despite having every reason to be bitter and cruel toward the world, chose to help a suffering child." "Marcus, be reasonable," Victoria Ashford intervened with her nasal voice. "His record speaks for itself. Criminal father, fake documents. And my record?" Marcus cut her off, turning to face her with contained fury. "Do you want me to tell everyone here about my childhood in Detroit? About the times my mother was arrested for drug possession? About how I myself was detained 3 times before turning 18? The silence that followed was absolute. The first-class passengers looked at Marcus as if he'd admitted to being an alien. "That's different," Morrison muttered, clearly uncomfortable. "Different how?" Marcus roared, making Isabella cry even louder. "Because I managed to get rich? Because I pay for first-class tickets? Does that magically erase where I came from?" Diego looked up for the first time, surprised by the unexpected defense. Marcus approached Morrison, his intimidating presence filling the space. "You want to know the truth about snap judgments? 15 years ago, I was in a meeting trying to get my first investment. The businessman looked at me, a black kid from the ghetto, and said exactly what you just said. These types always have ulterior motives." The tension in the air was so thick it seemed possible to cut it with a knife. "Know what happened to that investor?" Marcus smiled coldly. "His company went bankrupt 2 years later. And know who bought the assets for a fraction of their value? Me." Morrison swallowed hard, finally realizing who he was dealing with. Marcus turned to Diego, who watched the scene with a mix of gratitude and confusion. "Diego, I need to ask some questions, and I want honest answers." The young man nodded nervously. "The fake documents, did you use them to escape a dangerous situation?" Diego hesitated, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "Was someone hurting you in the last foster home?" This time, Diego couldn't hide the tears that welled up in his eyes. "Yes, sir." Marcus felt cold fury rise up his spine. He recognized that look. The same one he saw in the mirror at 17. "And do you have somewhere to go when this plane lands in Miami?" Diego shook his head negatively, the vulnerability in his posture breaking Marcus's heart. "Then here's what's going to happen," Marcus announced, his voice echoing through the cabin. "Diego is staying with me during the Miami layover. I'll arrange proper documentation through my lawyers and a safe place for him to stay." "You've completely lost your mind," Morrison exploded. "You can't just adopt a criminal minor." "I can do whatever I want," Marcus replied with absolute authority. "And if anyone here has a problem with that, I suggest they reconsider who they're dealing with." That's when flight attendant Sarah approached discreetly. "Mr. Whitfield, I need to inform you that Mr. Morrison contacted Miami authorities. There will be police waiting when we land." Diego turned completely pale, his knees almost giving out. "They're going to take me back. They're going to hand me over to—" "No," Marcus said with iron determination. "They won't." Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Jonathan? It's Marcus. I need you and your entire legal team at Miami Airport in 2 hours. Yes, it's urgent. I don't care if it's Sunday. Also bring the social services people who worked on the foundation case last year. Diego watched him with total disbelief. Mr. Whitfield, you don't need to. Yes, I do, Marcus interrupted, his voice softening for the first time. You know why? Because 15 years ago, when I was desperate and had no way out, one person believed in me. A teacher named Mrs. Patterson. She didn't have money, didn't have influence, but she had something much more powerful. She saw potential where others saw only problems. Marcus extended his hand to Diego. Isabella hasn't stopped crying for weeks. Pediatricians, sleep specialists, no one could help her. You did it in minutes. That's not coincidence. It's a gift. Morrison and Victoria exchanged uncomfortable looks, realizing they had severely underestimated both Marcus and the situation. And there's one more thing, Marcus continued, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. Something you'll discover when we land. Something about me that will explain why this encounter with Diego wasn't just coincidence. Diego took Marcus's extended hand, feeling for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, he'd found someone who truly understood his struggle. But neither of them knew that the next few hours would reveal secrets about Marcus's past that would completely transform this mentor and pupil story into something much deeper and more personal. And that the police arrival in Miami would be just the beginning of a twist that no one aboard could have predicted. Miami Airport was buzzing with activity when Flight 447 finally landed. Diego looked through the window and his heart sank seeing 3 police cars and 2 social service agents waiting on the tarmac. They came for me, he whispered, his voice choked. Marcus was holding Isabella, who had miraculously remained calm in Diego's arms throughout the rest of the flight. Trust me, he said firmly. This is going to end very differently than you think. Morrison smiled with venomous satisfaction as he prepared to disembark. Justice will be served. This delinquent will finally pay for his crimes. That's when Marcus turned to face all the first-class passengers, his expression carrying an intensity that made the air thick. Before we leave this plane, you're all going to find out who Diego Santos really is. And who I really am. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened a photo folder that made Diego gasp in total shock. Diego, answer me one question, Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly. Your mother, was her name Carmen Santos? Diego turned completely pale. How do you know my mother's name? Marcus turned the phone screen so Diego could see. There was a photo from 15 years ago, a young Marcus Whitfield, thin and wearing cheap clothes, next to a Latino woman with a warm smile and a small boy about 2 years old. Because Carmen Santos saved my life 15 years ago, Marcus said, tears forming in his eyes. And this little boy in the photo is you. The silence that followed was deafening. Diego extended a trembling hand to touch the phone screen, his eyes fixed on his mother's image. That's impossible, he murmured. Carmen worked as a janitor in the building where I had my first office, Marcus continued, his voice heavy with emotion. A 10-square-meter room in the basement. I slept on the floor because I didn't have money for both rent and food. Marcus showed more photos. Carmen bringing homemade food, little Diego playing in the makeshift office, Marcus teaching the boy to count using coins. Your mother brought me dinner every day. She said I was too skinny, that I needed real food. And you? Marcus smiled through his tears. You used to stay in my office after school when your mother cleaned the building. Diego remembered vaguely. Memory fragments. A kind man who taught him numbers, who gave him candy, who made him laugh when his mother worked. When your mother got sick, Marcus continued, I paid for all the medical treatments. Private oncology, the best doctors. But the cancer was already too advanced. You were there at the hospital, Diego whispered, long-forgotten memories returning like waves. You held my hand when she... I promised her I'd take care of you, Marcus said, his voice breaking. But social services said a single 23-year-old man couldn't adopt. And then you disappeared from the system. I looked for you for years, Diego. Years. Morrison and Victoria watched the scene in complete silence, their expressions of superiority transforming into discomfort and something that looked like shame. When Isabella was born and Carmen wasn't here anymore to help, I started realizing how I'd lost important knowledge about caring for children, Marcus explained. And then, on this plane, when you did exactly what your mother used to do for me. I knew. Diego looked at Isabella in his arms, finally understanding why he felt so connected to the baby. She has the same cry I had when I was little. Identical, Marcus confirmed. Carmen always said babies cried in different ways, and you had to listen to what they were really saying. At that moment, the plane door opened and police entered, followed by Marcus's lawyers and social workers. Mr. Whitfield? One of the officers called. Marcus stood up, helping Diego do the same. Officer Johnson, thank you for coming. But as you can see, there's been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Morrison exploded. This fugitive minor used fake documents. Marcus turned to Morrison with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Morrison, I'd like to introduce you to my lawyer, Jonathan Mitchell. He has some interesting information about how slander and defamation work under the law. The lawyer stepped forward with a briefcase full of documents. Mr. Morrison, my client is suing you and anyone who repeated unfounded accusations about this young man for moral damages. The initial amount is $2 million. Morrison paled. But he really did use fake documents. Documents that were provided by an organization that protects at-risk minors, Marcus explained calmly. Completely legal when there's proven threat. Something my private investigators confirmed last night about Diego's last foster home. One of the social workers approached. Mr. Whitfield, we've confirmed your emergency custody petition. All documents are in order. Diego looked at Marcus in complete shock. Emergency custody? I promised your mother, Diego. A promise is a promise. Victoria Ashford tried to discreetly leave the plane, but Marcus intercepted her. Mrs. Ashford, before you go, I'd like you to know that your PR company just lost the $5 million contract with Whitfield Industries. Effective immediately. The socialite tried to protest, but the words died in her throat when she saw the determination in Marcus's eyes. And Morrison, Marcus continued, your consulting firm won't be needed anymore either. Considering you demonstrated a complete lack of judgment and character today. Morrison tried one last desperate card. You can't ruin our careers because of a criminal. That's when Diego, holding Isabella who was smiling peacefully, spoke for the first time with true confidence. My name is Diego Santos. My mother, Carmen Santos, was one of the most decent women who ever lived. She taught me that the true measure of a person isn't where they come from, but how they treat those who can't defend themselves. Diego looked directly at Morrison. You spent this entire flight trying to humiliate me for crimes my father committed. For circumstances I didn't control. But the only criminal thing I saw today was your unnecessary cruelty toward someone who just wanted to help. Officer Johnson smiled and shook his head. Case closed. Mr. Whitfield, the young man is under your legal custody. There's nothing more to investigate here. As Morrison and Victoria left the plane in humiliated silence, Marcus put his hand on Diego's shoulder. Your mother would be very proud of you today, he said softly. Diego held Isabella closer, tears of joy finally replacing those of pain. She always said angels appeared when we least expected them. Isabella looked at Diego and let out a crystalline giggle, as if she finally understood she was safe in the arms of someone who would love her unconditionally. 6 months later, Diego Santos Whitfield walked through the corridors of Whitfield Industries carrying Isabella, now 14 months old, who babbled happily while employees stopped to greet them. The transformation in their lives had been extraordinary. Diego had enrolled in Miami's best private school, where his grades in math and science surprised even the most experienced teachers. But more important than his academic success was how he had blossomed emotionally. The haunted, defensive boy from the airplane had become a confident young man who used his story to inspire others. Uncle Diego. Isabella would shout whenever she saw him, words that melted his heart every time. Marcus had officially adopted Diego 3 months after the airplane incident, making him legally his son and heir. That afternoon, Diego found Marcus in his office reviewing proposals for the Carmen Santos Foundation, created in honor of the woman who had saved both their lives. The foundation specialized in helping at-risk youth, offering not just financial resources, but mentorship and real growth opportunities. How did the investor meeting go? Marcus asked, looking up from the documents. We got another $2 million for the tutoring programs, Diego replied, placing Isabella in Marcus's lap. And the University of Miami wants to partner with us to create a college prep program. Marcus smiled with pride. In 6 months, Diego had become not just his son, but his most trusted partner in the foundation. The young man's emotional intelligence and life experience brought perspectives that no expensive consultant could offer. "There's something I need to tell you," Marcus said, his expression becoming more serious. "I got a call today. Morrison and Victoria." Diego tensed slightly. What did they want? "Forgiveness," Marcus replied simply. Apparently, losing million-dollar contracts and facing defamation lawsuits gave them a new perspective on snap judgments. Diego considered this for a moment, Isabella playing with his fingers. "You know what my mother always said? That forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or letting people hurt us again. It means releasing the anger that keeps us from growing." Marcus nodded, impressed once again by his son's wisdom. "And what's your decision?" "We'll accept their apology," Diego replied. "But we'll also use their experience as an example in our talks about prejudice and second chances." That's when Marcus's assistant announced an unexpected visit. "Mr. Whitfield, there's a group of young people here. They say they were inspired by Diego's story and want to know about the Foundation's programs." Diego and Marcus exchanged looks and smiled. This had become common since their story went viral on social media and national news. Young people from across the country wrote asking for help, inspiration, or simply sharing their own struggles. In the company lobby, 15 teenagers from different ethnicities and social backgrounds waited nervously. When Diego appeared carrying Isabella, their faces lit up with recognition and hope. "Are you the kids from the Detroit Youth Center?" Diego asked, approaching with Isabella, who immediately began waving to the visitors. "Yes, sir," replied a girl about 16. "We saw your TV interview and, well, many of us come from situations similar to yours. We wanted to know if it's really possible to change our story." Diego felt his heart tighten. 6 months ago, he was exactly like these young people, desperate, judged by others' mistakes, with no hope for the future. "Can I tell you what I learned?" Diego said, sitting down to be at their eye level. "The first thing is that your background doesn't determine your destiny. I'm living proof of that." Isabella started babbling happily, as if she wanted to join the conversation, making everyone laugh. "The second thing," Diego continued, "is that there will always be people who judge you for your family's past or circumstances you can't control. But there will also always be people willing to see your potential if you give them the chance." One of the boys raised his hand timidly. "But how did you know who to trust? How did you know Mr. Whitfield was different?" Diego looked at Marcus, who was watching the scene with tears in his eyes. "I didn't know. But I learned that sometimes you need to risk being vulnerable to let good people into your life. And more importantly, you need to be willing to be the good person in others' lives." "What do you mean?" asked the same girl. "On that plane, I could have stayed in my seat ignoring the babies crying. It wasn't my responsibility. But I chose to help because it was the right thing to do," Diego explained. "And it was that choice to do good without expecting anything in return that completely changed my life." Isabella reached out to one of the girls, who took her carefully and smiled when the baby grabbed her finger. Marcus approached the group. "The Carmen Santos Foundation has mentorship programs, scholarships, and internship opportunities for young people like you. But more than that, we have a family that understands your struggles because we've been through them." 2 hours later, when the young people left with application forms and contact numbers, Diego and Marcus sat in silence in the office, processing the conversation. "Do you realize what you just did?" Marcus asked softly. "What?" "You planted seeds of hope in 15 lives that could have taken very different paths without that conversation." Diego looked at Isabella, who was sleeping peacefully in his lap. "It's strange to think it all started with her crying on a plane." "It wasn't strange," Marcus corrected. "It was destiny. Your mother used to say that angels work in mysterious ways." When they got home that night, a mansion in Coral Gables that now truly felt like a home, Diego put Isabella to sleep while singing the same song in Spanish that his mother used to sing to him years ago. Marcus watched him from the doorway, amazed at how life had conspired to bring his family together in such an unexpected way. "Marcus." Diego called softly. "Yes." "Thank you for teaching me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to love and protect each other." Marcus smiled, remembering Carmen's words all those years ago. This boy has a special heart, Marcus. One day he's going to change the world. She was right. Diego hadn't just changed the world around him, but proved that compassion is the most powerful force in the universe. A simple act of kindness on a plane had transformed into a family, a foundation that helped hundreds of young people, and a story that inspired thousands. Isabella murmured softly in her sleep, and Diego whispered, "Good night, princess. Dream of all the lives you'll touch when you grow up." Because after all, if a prisoner's son could become heir to an empire built on love and second chances, any dream was possible. The real revenge against prejudice isn't destroying those who judge us wrongly, it's building something so beautiful and powerful that it becomes impossible to ignore our humanity. And sometimes, it all starts with the simple courage to help when someone needs it. If this story of overcoming, family, and second chances touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove love always conquers hate, and that our origins never determine our destiny.